Hey guys, and welcome to season 3 of the Us People podcast. I'm your host, Savia Rocks, and in this season, I get to make my guests laugh, cry, and even make them think about life a little differently with the questions I fire over to them, which digs into their lives and professions a little differently. We even had a chance to change up the intro, giving you a fresh, new sound. I look forward to sharing season 3 of the Us People podcast with you. Let's go.
Hi, I'm Dave Liu, and I'm an author, an entrepreneur, an advisor, someone who worked on Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and a little bit of Hollywood. I'm so excited to be on today's podcast with Savia Rocks. It's an honor to be on here.
Made up my mind, now's my time to shine. Now's my time to shine. Time that you let go, time that you let
Hey guys,
go.
and welcome to another episode of the Us People podcast. I'm your host, Savia Rocks, and today I am humbled to have Dave here with me. Dave is a 30-year veteran of Wall Street and Silicon Valley. He is also an advisor, author, entrepreneur, investor, and philanthropist. Dave, thank you so much for taking your time to come on the Us People podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great, and thanks again for having me on your show.
No, you're more than welcome. I'm so happy to have you on. I was excited. I was here early and I thought, yep, it's time to do this interview. So, Dave, my first question, which I love to ask all my guests that come on the show, is could you tell me about yourself, but also where you grew up and how that influenced you to be the person who you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in the United States, but I actually grew up in Hong Kong. My family moved back to Hong Kong a few years after I was born. So I grew up in Hong Kong during the 1970s and early 80s, which was a really great time to be there. Hong Kong was going through a transformation into becoming one of the Asian tigers, if you will, one of the cities and countries that was really an economic miracle. And during the period that I was there, it went from really a trading entry pot city into a financial powerhouse and became really the gateway into mainland China for a lot of companies. And so I would say, from a business and career standpoint, I was really influenced by seeing the power of entrepreneurship. My
Yeah.
father was an entrepreneur. He started a light manufacturing business where he made electronics and Game Boys and electronic calculators. And even at a very young age, I learned business from him. I used to go to his office and I would actually work in the factory making
I like it.
electronics when I was a young boy. And I saw frankly, the struggles of also being an entrepreneur, the challenges around managing your business and managing cash flow. So I would say that from a career standpoint, that early formative years before I went to college really gave me a sense of the economic engine of the country, as well as the firsthand experience of seeing what it's like to be an entrepreneur, and influenced me throughout my career life from that point onward. From a demographic standpoint, I was privileged to grow up in an environment where I was not the minority.
Yeah.
So, uh, the vast majority of people in Hong Kong kind of look like me, of Asian descent. And even though I have a Chinese father and a Filipino mother,
Yeah.
I blended in largely because of my ethnicity. And so when I came to America to study and to work, I didn't really know what it felt like to be treated any differently, and frankly, differently from the majority in power until I got to the US. And so that was a very enlightening experience for me because it allowed me to kind of juxtapose the experience of going from an environment where I was part of the majority to an environment where I was now part of the minority
Yeah.
and suffered from all the biases and the challenges that you have when you're a minority in an organization. So I would say that those are probably the two biggest compelling experiences that I had growing up that shaped me into the person I am today. And after I left Hong Kong, I came to the U.S. and I studied here and ultimately made my career here, and have gone back to Asia many, many times for business and for family, but have now spent close to two-thirds of my life in America and one-third in Asia.
That's absolutely amazing. That's absolutely amazing that you could do all that stuff. Even in my first question, you've covered so much in what you've done and where you've grown up. But my second question goes a little bit deeper into who you are, Dave, which is, who do you see when you look in the mirror? And on the flip side of that question, have you ever looked in the mirror and not recognized the person staring back at you? How did you manage to come back and be the person who you want to be and who you are right now?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you use the object and metaphor of looking in the mirror, because that probably is the single thing that really, emphasized to me that I wasn't like everybody else,
Yeah.
and not necessarily a good way.
Oh.
So I was born with a very severe birth difference. I was born with a bilateral cleft lip and palate, and for the people that aren't familiar with that, what that is essentially parts of your face are not fused correctly at birth. And so you're born with clefts and holes in your face. And in my situation, I was born with a massive hole in the center of my face. And what that resulted in is the need for about 11 surgeries and a lifetime of treatment in the hospital and in and out of the hospital up until the age of 18. So these are pretty serious surgeries. Surgeries generally are serious in general, but when they deal with the craniofacial elements of us, they can be quite serious. So it wasn't, frankly, something that was easy to uh, endure, but it really taught me a lot about endurance and grit and just being frankly tough and learning how to deal with adversity and dealing with a certain roll of the dice. Um, and unfortunately, the challenge when you're growing up is that the birth difference that I had is highly visual.
Yeah.
So when I looked in the mirror, it was pretty obvious to me that what I would see is what other people would see, which would be a heavily scarred boy, young man. And um, unfortunately, the challenge with that is you end up being a little bit like a walking car crash.
Oh.
People can't stop staring at you, and they don't. I don't think they necessarily mean bad when they stare at you, but it's just kind of one of those things where people look at you and they wonder, did this boy, get in a car crash? Did he get in a knife fight? What's the history behind this boy? And so I would say that that experience was both a blessing and a curse. The A blessing is that I think it made me really, really tough. It made me realize that the person looking back at me um, needs to be tough and needs to look out for themselves and figure out their own way in this world. Because the curse part of it is that you constantly feel alone, frankly. You feel like an outsider. It's actually quite similar, I think, to the way you feel when you're a minority
Yeah.
in an environment where everybody else is different from you, and you're the only one that sticks out. You're the only woman in a room full of guys, or you're the only person of color in a room full of Caucasian people. I think there's definitely some similarities to it. And so I would say that the person looking back at me was someone who felt somewhat like an outsider, a constant outsider. Despite the fact that I grew up in an environment where the vast majority of people were the same ethnicity, I still felt like an outsider. But it also helped me become really resilient, self reliant. And that really helped me a lot through my career, because one of the things I've learned now, having been on this planet for almost 50 years and having spent a good 30 of those in corporate America and rising the corporate ladder, is that as you go up the ladder, the stakes get exponentially higher,
Yes.
which also means that the the stress and the challenges that you will face will actually get worse and more difficult, not easier as you go higher. And so I think that having a tough exterior, resiliency really helps a lot in weathering the challenges. And I think that my upbringing, that boy I looked at in the mirror all those years ago, I think that really helped me and propel me throughout my career.
That's a really good way of looking at life. I definitely feel that because there are so many things in life that people go through and don't necessarily. Because one of the questions I do ask people is sometimes, what is the hardest question you've ever had to ask yourself while looking in the mirror? Do you feel like you could answer that, Dave, in the sense of sometimes we look in the mirror and we say to ourselves, there are things we need to change about ourselves. But has there ever been a time after doing all you have done and all you have been through, have you ever looked in the mirror and said a question to yourself that you know that you might not like the answer to, but you had to answer it to help you evolve as a person? What was the question and how did you help yourself to evolve?
I would say that the question that I grapple with even now, but a lot less than when I was younger, is the question of, is this all there is?
Yeah,
And I think that when I was growing up and I had challenges, all the challenges you have as an adolescent, and then more so because of my birth difference. I was also very obese. I wasn't athletic. The only thing I was actually pretty good at was I was pretty good at taking tests. So
yeah,
I was pretty good at school, but I was pretty much terrible at everything else. I would say that growing up, I always wondered, hey, is this all there is, right? Is it, I'm going to be good at taking tests, and so maybe one day, I'll work in some lab somewhere and do tests for a living, right? That doesn't sound very fulfilling right now, but maybe that's all there is. And then when I started my career, I was a really good junior person. I
yeah,
was really good at um, doing spreadsheets and presentations and making sure there are no typos, all the stuff that you want like a junior person to be good at. But I wasn't extroverted in any way. I wasn't a good speaker. I wasn't a good presenter. I didn't have any gravitas. And I saw that, particularly in the career I chose, which was working on Wall Street,
yeah.
that those are the superpowers that get you up the corporate ladder.
That's
And I
true.
didn't have any of those. And so I think early in my career, I also wondered, hey, am I on a path to basically get jettisoned in middle management? Am I on a path where this is all there is? I'm gonna work my tail off for a couple of years, make a little bit of money, but I'm never gonna get to the top because I don't have what these other people have, these other capabilities that I don't have, and I'm not even sure how I'm gonna get them. And so I would say that the question that gnawed at me for a long, long time, probably until my mid 20s, I would say, was is this all there is for me?
Yeah,
And then I think as I grew up in my career and I did progress, and I was one of the fastest ever to be promoted at my firm, and I can go into more detail as to
yeah,
what did I do. I think that question started to uh, become less prominent in my thinking. Um, but there's definitely times where, I might, retire from, a career on Wall Street and then become an entrepreneur and become an investor. And then I still ask that question, hey, is this all there is? And then what I do is I try to use that actually to challenge me, to become a writer, to become an author, right? To explore becoming a film producer, right? These other things that I've never done before, but I feel that as a human being, that's one way that I can keep growing by constantly challenging myself and answering that question. Is this all there is? The answer is no. No, absolutely not, right? And you need to think about, you, Dave, you need to think about how you make sure that the answer to that question is no. And so
that's
it
true.
drives
Yeah.
me in an interesting way now, whereas I think it almost was a little bit of a something that could defeat me when I was younger. Now it really drives me forward as I'm older.
I think you believed in yourself from a very young age, and asking yourself that question helped you to believe in yourself, helped you, like you say, to give yourself that push, that drive, that motivation to be who you are and where you are today. And without that, Dave, I don't necessarily think that you would be the person who you are today, which is so important. I would love for people to know more about what you do on Wall Street. Everybody has this big perception, and I'm sure you know this about Wall Street from watching movies and so on and so forth, reading books, as we all know. Yeah. But from your perception of working in Wall Street for over 30 years or being in it for 30 years, what is the truth, if you're allowed to tell, of Wall Street, and just to clear people's perceptions in their mind of what Wall Street is and what Wall Street actually does?
Yeah, so I will say that the answer to that question is actually a very profound question to ask and also a very profound answer to answer as early as possible in your career. Because I will say that having worked on Wall Street, worked in Silicon Valley, dabbled in Hollywood, I will tell you that I find that the vast majority of young professionals don't even know to ask that question and don't know the answer to that question. And there's a lot of people who join a firm, embark on a career, and they just read the brochureware or they hear what the company tells them is the job. And then when they go into the job, they realize, oh my gosh, this is actually not what I thought it was.
Yep.
And I've seen that time and time again. And I do think that that contributes to a little of the uh, disappointment that many of us have in our careers. So going back to your question, what I like to think about is what actually do you do on a daily basis?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the best questions that any interviewee can ask a prospective hirer, prospective manager. It's like put aside all the stuff I see on the internet or people talk about because everyone likes to embellish their job, right? Everyone likes to talk about how they're involved in strategic decision making and changing the world type stuff, right? And that's all great. That I think that actually is more advertising. I think what matters is, but what do you exactly do? And
Exactly.
so with Wall Street, it's really interesting. Wall Street is an aggregation of lots of different types of jobs. But what I will hone in on is the job that I had, which was really being a banker, which is I think what most people think of when they think about Wall Street.
Yeah.
And my overarching purpose as a banker was to be part of a team that would essentially help clients get liquidity.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that we would help companies raise capital, raise cash, raise money, or we'd help sell their businesses. And to me, that's fundamentally what Wall Street is about. Wall Street is about providing liquidity to companies, providing cash resources to companies. Now, when you double click on what do you do as a junior person on Wall Street as a banker, I would say that fundamentally you become an expert in two things. One is you become a Excel god, so you become someone that knows how to manipulate spreadsheets really well,
Mm-hmm.
and you become a disciple of PowerPoint. You become really good at making presentations. And so, as a sidebar, when I was really young, I wanted to be a cartoonist. I
Yes.
wanted to draw pictures, funny stories, things like that. And I like to joke that when I was a junior banker, I essentially became a cartoonist because what I specialized in was making fancy presentations with a lot of pictures and images to convince people to invest or buy a company. And so at the very junior level, you are an Excel god and a PowerPoint junkie. That's really what you're really good at. And they don't say that, when they're trying to recruit you because that doesn't sound very sexy, right? That actually sounds kind of boring. But that's fundamentally what you do as a junior person. Now,
Yeah.
as you go up the corporate ladder to the senior banker, which is what I was when I before I retired from the business, I would say that despite all of the movies you might have watched or the way managing directors and heads of Wall Street and masters of the universe describe themselves, I say fundamentally what you are is you're a salesman or a saleswoman.
Yes.
You're basically selling every day. And so that's really the superpower. It's you're selling, and part of selling is developing relationships, getting people to trust you,
Mm-hmm.
particularly if they're going to have you raise money for their company or sell their company. you're essentially the nanny. You're the person that's going to help shepherd their baby along and help them monetize it or get liquidity for it. And in order for you to engender their trust as a senior banker on Wall Street, you need to develop relationships and you need to know how to sell like there's no tomorrow. And so, to answer your question, there's obviously a continuum, but when you start your career on Wall Street, you're an Excel and PowerPoint person, and then when you get to the top, you're really a master salesman.
Yes.
And there's a long arc and transition that needs to occur because those are very different roles. And frankly, a lot of people of color, I think, are really good at the junior level work, but then they don't know how to adapt and play the game to get to the master salesperson
Yeah.
role. And that's really the art of managing your career and rising the corporate ladder.
That's really mad that you actually said that. Now that I'm thinking about it, it is quite true from what I've seen and what I watch. Obviously, being in the corporate world and having to work in the corporate world, which I have done, I see how people climb up the ladder of different nationalities and cultures. But I embrace that. And for me, I'm always actually the only colored one there. So it's actually quite intriguing and it helps me to evolve, especially when I'm doing something. So I'm so glad that you answered that the way you did. But the beautiful thing about that is, Dave, is that more and more people are starting to understand it and climb up that ladder. And you're one of the prime people to actually say that, which is perfect. So thank you so much for answering that the way you did. My next question for you is you've worked for so many companies, Dave. You know, like you say, helping them get equity, go on a ladder, become what they need to become, establish themselves as a company. But what is the most humbling thing you have ever done from working with all these companies that you feel has humbled you as a person?
Oh, it just working with companies and dealing with the trials and tribulations of having to deal with the process of helping them raise money or sell their company is just a humbling experience in of itself because you might go from one day or I went from one day where I would sell a company for over $1 billion and feel like, wow, I'm the man. I am amazing. Like there is nothing better than me. Like I'm just, the Michael Jordan of my profession and I'm really good at this. And then the next day, I might have a client call me up and just rip me a new one because some deal fell through or some investor pulled out and they'll say I'm the worst banker they ever had. You're a terrible negotiator. You don't know what you're doing, and that's incredibly humbling. And I think that when I had a career as a senior banker, I think it's probably the closest that I've ever gotten to professional sports.
Yeah,
I think that
I like that.
when you play at that level and the stakes are so high,
Hmm.
and everyone tends to be pretty good at what they do at that level, there will be days where you do amazing and you will feel like you're the goat, you're the greatest of all time, and there's nobody that can replace you, and the firm should pay you a ton of money. And then there are other days where you feel like, wow, I'm not very good at this, or I'm easily replaceable and I better work my tail off because somebody else wants my job or can take my job or my firm might want to replace me. So I would say that the high stakes nature of dealing with M&A and IPOs and financings is such that there are days where you are incredibly proud and dare I say a little arrogant about the value you bring, and then there are days where you're incredibly humbled because something just blew up in your face.
Yeah,
And I think that you have to be mentally ready for that because I'm not sure everybody can go through those kind of roller coasters. But going back to my upbringing, I think that upbringing of mine kind of helped me go through those roller coasters where there'll be great days and there'll be terrible days. So I would say that in my years as a senior person, um, almost every other day was a humbling experience because let's face it, when you are dealing with these very high pressured, high value situations,
yeah,
it only takes one or two things to go wrong and they evaporate. And so you're kind of doing a high wire act with no net when you're dealing with very large transaction possibilities. And that can be a very humbling thing when you fall off that wire and you splatter on
Yeah,
the ground.
that's definitely true. It's definitely true. There's one I would love to ask. So, for a second, Dave, I'm going to strip away all the financial security that you have, and I'm going to strip away all your titles. One question I want to ask you: who is Dave without all of this? Who are you really inside? Who do you feel you are? And how would you like to share that with us?
I'm a purpose driven person, and I think that I don't know the meaning of life, and I think that we all have a different meaning of life. But for me, I think of myself as part of a whole, and I think that my goal here is to advance humanity maybe a micromillimeter, like in a small way in some possibility. And in many ways, a lot of what I've done up until this point and have continue to do going forward are all just foundational building blocks towards some greater purpose, some greater goal. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what it is. I think I do have a sense of what it is, and what I've been trying to do in this second half of my life, if you will, is to focus on amplifying and helping uh, the Asian American community because that's
Yes.
one that is very near and dear to my heart. And so I've been focused on everything from um, career advice through the writing of my book and pledging all the proceeds from my book to charity, primarily Asian American charities. It's also about helping to report the news that's important to the Asian American community by being a sponsor and vice chairman of AsiaAmNews.com, which is a leading website for Asian American news, as well as helping drive more representation in media by helping and financing production and TV and Broadway production companies run by and founded by Asian Americans. And so I think if you strip everything away, I think my goal is really to advance things that are important to me, and I think hopefully are important to all of us as human beings. A couple millimeters, maybe by the time I leave this planet, um, and that's what I'm really driven by. I've never really been driven to make a lot of money. I've never really been driven to amass titles or power. I've
Yeah.
always viewed that as just kind of part of the foundational building blocks to get me to this point where I am now. And I'm definitely in a mode where I'm focused on giving back and trying to help the community any way I can.
I love that. Not many people do that, Dave. Believe me. A lot of people get to a level of success and then they actually forget where they come from, which is actually quite disappointing. And I'm so glad there are people in the world like yourself who do that.
Yeah, I think, I'm a big believer in irony. And when you look at, for instance, storytelling and film and movie, usually what we as human beings actually gravitate towards are those stories that are ironic, that
Yes.
have a paradox of some type in them. And if you stop and think about this overall need of ours to um, advance ourselves in some way, fundamentally we are a walking paradox. We are a walking ironic story, which is in many ways, if you want to be successful, um, and I think a lot of people are like this, frankly. If you want to be really successful, then you can't ever be satisfied because if you're satisfied, then you stop growing. You stop pursuing that title, that compensation, that skill, that new industry that um, can really help you and propel you. But then fundamentally, I think the secret to happiness is actually being satisfied. To be happy with what you have, right, and not focus on what the Joneses have or the neighbors have or what your that person you graduated school with, how far are they in their career and how do you benchmark yourself? So I think that's fundamentally one of the challenges that we have because they're diametrically opposed forces, right? There's part of you that says, don't ever be happy, don't ever be satisfied, and you're going to keep growing and growing and growing, and you'll advance yourself. But then there's the other part of you, which is like, to be happy, you got to be satisfied. You can't worry so much about what you don't have, right?
That's
And I
true.
think that's fundamentally the irony, if you will, of what we all face. And I try to balance that. Like I try to think about, okay, what are the things that I need to continue to do that I'm not satisfied with about myself, right? But keep that within certain bounds so I don't drive myself nuts worrying about what other people think of me or what my classmates are doing with their careers. And it's challenging, but I think the much like the Eastern philosophy, the yin and the yang, the opposites being part of the whole. I think that's fundamentally the secret to finding purpose. It's like finding that right balance for yourself where you are both satisfied and unsatisfied, and you have a
Yes.
happy equilibrium.
I think, which actually leads on to my next question. When was the last time you felt, Dave, that you were actually felt like you had peace in your soul?
I'm not sure I've ever really had true peace in my soul. I think when I think back, the early parts of my life were definitely tough. Not only because of my health issues, but also when I was in college, we didn't have any money. I was at poverty and I was running scared. I needed to make sure that I could have a lucrative career where I could not only support myself, but also support my family and not worry about having food to eat. And
Yeah.
I would say that really drove me in the early part of my career. It was fear. It was fear of not having enough money to support myself and my family. And Wall Street seemed like a really good place to at least cover the bases in a relatively short amount of time. And it was also a career path that I knew I was pretty good at the junior level, and I started to develop skills around the things that were required to ascend the corporate ladder.
Yeah.
Um, but then when I got to 40, I'm not sure I was at peace then either because I was certainly much more financially secure and I was able to retire. But I always felt that there was a little bit of an unfulfilled goal of mine, which was to be a great dad, to also be an entrepreneur. And so I kind of scratched that itch, and obviously with my boys, being a dad, that's an itch that never goes away, right? It's both
Yeah.
it's the toughest job in the world, but it's also the most amazing one.
Yeah.
And I try to be as good a dad as I can every day. The entrepreneurial itch kind of started to go away after I started my fourth company, and I felt okay. I kind of know this playbook. I think I can be a decent entrepreneur, and I kind of know what it takes. And so I think I became more at peace with the elements of my life that uh, I think historically I felt I couldn't do, and I felt now I can do that.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that if you're, it is a little bit. It goes back to my original point about the paradox of like happiness versus growth, right? It's like
Exactly.
one requires you to be satisfied, the other requires you to be not satisfied, and I think I'm at an equilibrium, and I'm not sure that you can ever truly find peace unless you find peace in chaos, and
That's true.
I'm definitely more peaceful now than I've ever been in my life. I like the balance of what I'm doing on the entrepreneurial side as well as the creative side. But I can't tell you like I'm at enlightenment yet. That might still be a long way away.
You never know. It might be around the corner. Sometimes we don't realize things are in front of us. It's just that sometimes we don't see it. But that's the beautiful journey of life, is not always seeing the end of the tunnel. So that's kind of how I see life. My next one for you, Dave, is let's talk about your book. You decided to write a book. You said to me at first that you didn't feel necessarily that you were always creative, and that you were really good at doing tests and so on and so forth. But in my mind, from listening to your story from the beginning, from where we started to where we are now, I feel like you have a lot of creativity within you. creativity is defined in so many different ways. And I think sometimes people just think creativity is within music or within arts, and that's not necessarily true. Creativity could be within finance, just like you've done, because you do have to get very creative when you're doing sales, when you're being the junior, or when you're doing spreadsheets. All these things are really quite creative. And I taught myself this and I learned this. But when you decided to write a book, where was your mindset at for you to turn around and say, I'm going to do this. This is something that I need to do. This is something that I want the world to read, to understand.
Yeah, so it really did not start off to be a book at all. It started off with me writing down all the things that I wish someone had taught me about rising the corporate ladder.
Yeah.
And I had the privilege of going to two of the top business schools in the world. And I've also had countless hours of HR and leadership training. And I will tell you that nowhere did I ever learn anything that actually helped me scale the corporate ladder. I learned a lot of the traditional frameworks and ways to talk to people, but nothing really prepared me for getting to the upper echelons of management on Wall Street. And so I do fundamentally believe that a big part of the unhappiness uh, that we all experience is due to work,
Yeah.
because many of us spend the vast majority of our lives at work. And being a doting father and someone that cares about my two boys a lot, I started to write down all the things that helped me in my career into what I joke was a manifesto. It was probably 50 pages of bullet points and just ideas, tactics. And I started to write all this down with the goal that one day I would give it to them, perhaps, at their graduation from college, and say, hey, here's a whole bunch of tactics that worked for your old man long time ago. Just read through it, and there might be a few that'll work for you. And there would be stuff in there from, how did I negotiate my compensation? How did I position myself to get the promotion? How did I conduct myself in meetings? How did I learn the language of that industry? All these things that, again, like, I haven't found any other resource for this stuff that's highly practical.
Yeah.
And that was really the net of my goal, which was to kind of get this thing at a point before I forgot everything, and give it to my boys. And what
Wow.
happened during the pandemic, I started talking to a few friends of mine, and we were just catching up. We were all trapped on Zoom, and we say, "Hey, what's going on? What are you up to?" And I said, I'm in the middle of dealing with one of my companies, but I'm also kind of brushing up this manifesto I've been writing for years, like, with just ideas and thoughts. And so one of my good friends, who's an author, was actually quite curious and said, "Hey, can you send over your manifesto and let me take a look?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, you can take a look at it if you like." I sent it over to him. He looked at it, and he called me back and said, "Hey, man, like, this could be a really good book. This could actually help a lot of people, not just your boys, but this could help people that feel underrepresented in the workforce, people that feel like the workforce is rigged against them, and they don't know the unwritten rules. They don't know how to manage the shadow org chart, not the org chart, but the shadow one that we all know companies have." Um, and so I started to think about, well, I've never written a book before. It seems like a gargantuan task from everything I've seen, but I started to think about it. And fundamentally, I decided, you know what, like, we're all kind of trapped at home anyway. Maybe I'll actually exercise some of those creative muscles and actually write down these ideas. And so I'd say the linchpin ultimately was that I determined that I could turn it into a philanthropic project. So I figured, okay, on the one hand, just spreading the ideas could help a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I'm not a paid author. I have no interest in charging for speaking or any of that stuff. So I figured that, okay, if I can memorialize all my ideas, perhaps I could, talk to various communities of people of color, women's groups, anybody looking for, just some more advantages in the workforce. I could talk to them and share some of these ideas, and maybe make the world a little bit less of the workforce a little less depressing by helping people advance themselves. And then if the book was even moderately successful, then there might be some royalties that I could then, donate to charity and amplify the message of those charities. And so that fundamentally was the reason why I decided to put pen to paper and write down everything. It I'm so happy I did it. It did exercise a lot of my creative muscles that have been dormant for more than 30 years. Uh, and I got to not only write in my style of writing, which is a little more irreverent and
I like
sarcastic
that.
and something that you don't normally find in a career book. In fact, my publisher Wiley told me like they've never published a career book like this, which is meant to be irreverent and funny, not frankly kind of more prescriptive and more textbook like. Uh, and then I made sure that every chapter was written in a way that I wish I had every book written the same way.
Yeah.
So every chapter begins with a cartoon and ends with bullet points. And what I tell people is that it's a 300-page book. It's 30 chapters, but you don't have to spend a lot of time reading it. What I would do is I would read the cartoon in the beginning of every chapter. I would read the bullet points at the end. That'll take you 30 seconds. And if there's enough in the cartoon and the bullet points to pique your interest, then read the chapter. Otherwise, just skip
Yes.
it and don't worry about it. And so um, I'm really glad that I did it. Um, I've been able to because the book has actually done very well. A couple bestseller awards and
Yeah.
ranked by Bloomberg as one of the best books of 2021. I've been able to donate a not insignificant amount of money to various charities, and the is not so much the money, but being able to amplify the message of those charities has also been really rewarding. So. Um, I know I went a little longer than your intention on that
No, I
question.
love it. No, I loved it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just it was something that I didn't intend to do, but I'm so happy I did it.
I can see when somebody is passionate about what they do, Dave. And listening to you and every single question I ask you and the answers that you give me back, I can feel your energy of how passionate you are about what you do, where you've come from, but also giving back to the community. And I hope, I'm proud of you. And I don't even, I've only been on here with you for a little while, but I'm proud of you because of what you do. I know there are loads of people like us in the world who want to give back to people, but we're making a change. And even if you say like it's a millimeter or centimeter or an inch, it doesn't matter. Put that all together and we'll be doing meters of giving back to the world. So keep doing what you're doing, Dave. It's so important. It's so, so important. My next one for you, Dave, is if there was a question you wish that people asked you, but they never really do, what would that question be and why?
The one question that I don't get asked enough, uh, and I think is really the one of the key questions, particularly young people should ask, is what would you say is the most important skill or thing to learn and train in order to be successful in your career? And I think that it goes to, frankly, a lot of what I write in my book, but I think it just comes down to understanding human psychology and
Yes.
understanding how people think and understand their motivations
Hmm.
so that you can build incentives for them to help you or for you to help them. And I think one of the challenges, and frankly, I'll speak as an Asian American, I think Asian Americans aren't as well attuned to this. You aren't told that. In fact, you're rarely told that growing up.
Yeah.
What you're told is that just work hard, get good grades, do the best job you can, don't play politics, don't worry about what other people are doing, and you'll be fine. And I'll tell you, that works at the junior level. That is so far from the truth at the senior level. That's not the way the world works. The way the world works is that in order to get ahead in your career, more than 99% of the time, unless you are a solitary writer in a cabin in the woods, you are part of a team. And you need to figure out how to motivate your team. And you need to figure out what motivates them. And
Yes.
by studying human psychology and some of the more specific categories like cognitive bias and behavioral economics and some of these other fields that I cover in quite depth in my book, and also I've studied for quite a long time. What you learn is that people are fundamentally irrational. That people don't act the way you expect them to. And I think the earlier you figure that out in your career, I think the better you will be. And I'm not talking just about career, actually. I think just in life in general. I always like to think that when I see some behavior that seems really irrational, whether it be political or uh, economic, what I do is rather than just dismiss that person as being a bonehead and saying like, oh, this guy or gal is just a fool. They don't know what they're doing. What I try to do is I really try to get to the heart of what's motivating that behavior. Like what is the fundamental driver? And I think as human beings, if we spent more time really digging deeper into each of our individual motivations, then I do think that we will better understand each other, and we also will be able, in the corporate setting, be able to better navigate and motivate and manage people the way we need them to in order to help us or help our career. So
I'm
I would
so
say
glad
that's
you said that.
probably the one question that I don't get asked enough, and I wish more young people would ask me that, because notice I didn't say things like, "Oh, you need to learn these 4x4 matrices," or "You need to,
Yeah,
get really good at math," or "You need to, make sure that you memorize Wikipedia." No, none of that. I actually don't think any of that stuff really matters at the end of the day. I think what matters most is, again, unless you are a solitary producer in the woods somewhere, you don't have to work with anybody. I think it's really understanding what motivates people and understanding the fact that we're all irrational and we do things that are seemingly irrational for a whole bunch of reasons that research has shown us. And the key is to really figure out how you then harness that to advance your career or advance your goals.
I'd be really interested to know, Dave, what is the best advice you've ever received that's helped you in your life?
The best advice I've ever gotten, I've gotten this advice, frankly, many times, but one of my mentors was the CEO of my firm. And he actually wasn't a person of color. He's a Caucasian man, and he ended up taking a liking to me, and he became my mentor. He also helped me with recommendations to business school, and he even read my book and endorsed my book, which went a long way in giving me credibility. Right, when the CEO of the firm that you rose corporate ladder endorses your book.
Yeah,
I'd say that the one piece of advice that he gives everybody, but it really stuck out at me because when I was a young person, I went to his office. He had this picture on his desk, and it was essentially of dinosaurs, and below were some words, and it said "adapt or die." Very simple, adapt or die, and that has really resonated with me throughout my entire career. I think that if you're not adapting, you're dying, and
true.
in the world we're in now, even more so, where the velocity of change seems to be accelerating, where frankly, a lot of the capabilities and skills that you think you have and nobody else has is being disseminated at lightning speed now through the internet, through YouTube videos, through tutorials. A lot of the advantages that you may have today are very ephemeral and will dissipate in short order. So if you're not adapting, if you're not constantly pushing the envelope of what you can contribute, then there is a potential that you may not die, but you certainly can get marginalized. You
That's
can
true.
certainly find other people that might be able to do the same thing you claim to do cheaper, faster, maybe with less aggravation. And so I think that's probably the best piece of advice that I've gotten throughout my career, which is always be adapting. Otherwise, you're dying, and um, that's a mantra that I live by.
I love that. I love that. The way you said that. That was perfect. Spot on. Thank you so much, Dave. I only have two more for you before we depart, but my second to last question is, which I love to ask, is after you feel like you have done everything that you possibly can in the world to make it a better place where you feel like you've contributed, what would you like your legacy to be, and how would you like people to remember you?
I'm not sure I have a good answer for that yet, but what I would hope people take away is that this is one way to live your life. And the way I've lived my life is one of trade-offs. I started my career really all about advancing my economic situation so that I could build a nest egg. And I essentially did the work life trade off. I gave up life for work. And I got to a point where I was in my 40s. I had two children at that point where I started to swing the pendulum the other way. And I said, look, the 20s and 30s were all about me working really hard, giving up a lot of life. But now it's all about like being there for my two boys and having a much better life and probably less on the work side. And um, that's given me the opportunity now to explore lots of things that I've always wanted to do, but never had the opportunity because I was in a client-based business where I needed to be flying around the world and being in front of clients all day long. So I didn't have time to be a dad. I didn't have time to write a book. I didn't have time to explore some of the creative things that I've been doing now, like uh, being a cartoonist. I actually have a cartoon strip now.
Yeah.
Writing career articles, exploring things on the entertainment, film, TV side. Those are things I never had any time for. And I'm not saying that that is uh, the right way to live your life, but it's certainly one way to live your life where you dedicate certain parts of your life to uh, your work and building up your economic war chest, and then the second half of your life you focus on the things that you're really interested in and things that matter. Um, that's just kind of philosophy of how I've lived my life, and I know there are some people who don't agree with that. There are people that believe that it's really more about work-life balance and managing a life with both of those as you're going up. That fundamentally didn't work for me, and I think partly because I was in an environment where, um, ironically, you have the winner's curse, which is in order to get that top job, which everybody wants, in order to win it, you have to be cursed. You have to be more irrational than everybody else. And most of the time, what that means is you're willing to make more sacrifices than everybody else. And I will tell you, I think I'm kind of the living embodiment of the winner's curse. Like, in order for me to get that top job, like I had to sacrifice a lot more than others to get that top job. But I also was able to exit stage right, later on. So I would say that I'm not arrogant enough to think that there's going to be a whole philosophy around what I've said or how I've lived my life. But I would just hope that maybe one of my legacies is that some people can look at it and go like, oh, okay, this is actually an honorable way to live your life, right? You become good at a trade, you really hone it, and then you get to a point in your life where you can now give back and you can do other things and spend more time with your family. And I think I'm very proud of what I've done so far, and I hopefully will continue to do going forward.
I think you will. I think there's a lot more too that maybe you might even shock yourself with. I definitely think so. Dave, before I have the pleasure of thanking you for coming on the show, could you please let everyone know where they can find you, also find your book, know more about you, and if they would like to get in touch with you, where they can find you?
Sure. So you can get all that at one spot. The best way is probably just to go to my website. It's lucrative.com. It's a play on my last name. So it's
Yeah.
LIUCRATIVE.com. There's information about my book, The Way of the Wall Street Warrior, on my site. You can get the book pretty much anywhere. Amazon, there's a hardback and there's also audiobook available. And if you want to reach out to me, just go to my website. I have places where you can send me a message. I respond to every email request or note I get on there. And I look forward to hearing from people. I hope that in some way, hearing my story gives you a little inspiration or at least entertains you, you know. Uh,
Oh,
but I hope also that if you're interested in advancing your career or maybe helping someone that is kind of stuck in a rut and is looking for good career advice, that you suggest that they take a look at my book, because I'm hopeful that there's at least a handful of ideas and tips in there that might be able to help someone.
There's always something someone can take away from a book, even if it's a sentence. Even if it's definitely one sentence. Dave, I want to thank you so much for taking your time to come on the Ask People podcast. I want to thank you for your wisdom, your kindness, your compassion, but more than anything else, your honesty. And I think that's a trait that is so humbling. So Dave, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and I admire all the work you've done, and keep doing what you're doing. I think the more that we can amplify our messages and voices, the better, and share the wisdom that we all have.
Definitely. Dave, thank you again. Guys, thank you so much for listening to the Ask People podcast. And please remember, you can subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, and any other platform that you prefer listening to. Please also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And you can also donate to the Ask People podcast by simply going to the Savvy Rocks website or typing in PayPal.com/Us People Podcast. Guys, thank you so much for listening. Stay happy, stay positive, and as always, please continue to be kind to one another.
Time to let it go. Now's my time. Now's my time. Time to let it go. Now's my time. Now's my time. Time to let it go. Now is the time for me to focus. Stop all that playing hocus pocus. Stop doing it yourself. You need a little help. This time I want to see you shining.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Yeah, you asked some great questions.
I know the time's right. Trust in the process. Forget all the losses. You know that it's worth it. Cause nobody's perfect. Sometimes you need to say, I'm gonna be okay. Made up my mind, now is my time to shine. Now is my time to shine. Time that you let go, time that you let go. Now is my time to shine. Now is my time to shine. Now is my time to shine. Time that you let go, time that you let go. Now is my time to shine. Time to let it go. Now is my time. Now is my time. Time to let it go. Now is my time. Now is my time. Time to let it go. Now is my time. Now is my time. Time to let it go. You are your own worst enemy. Thinking too far, what's ahead of me? One day at a time. Just enjoy the ride. Open those eyes, see the light. Ignite that fire inside it. Let it breathe breath into life. Push all your fears to the side. Control your mind, it's all alright. Enjoy your life, the joy is mine. Commit to you, you got the tools. Everything you do, you make the rules. Sometimes